In this video, I'll show you how to build a website that is only accessible to people who hold an NFT from your NFT collection. By the end, you'll have a full stack web application built with the ThirdWeb React SDK, TypeScript, as well as Next.js. The app will have 2 pages, one of which is only accessible to NFT holders, and the other will allow users to authenticate and sign in following the sign in with Ethereum standard using ThirdWeb's new Auth SDK. Always remember you can access the full source code as well as other relevant resources in the description. And if you're new to the channel, please remember to subscribe for more Web3 educational content coming very soon, and like the video if you found some value in it. But without further ado, let's jump right into the code. The absolute first thing we want to do is we'll head to the command line and we'll run the npx thirdweb create command. What this is going to do is it's going to ask us a series of questions of how we want to initialize our project. The first question we can see here is what kind of project we want to create. I'm going to go ahead and select application since we'll be building out a website in this video. I'll give our project a name. I'll call mine NFT Gated website. And then it asks us what framework do we want to use. So if you're following along this video, I'd suggest you select Next.js, as we will be using specific features like the API routes provided by Next.js to run code on the server side. And I'm going to use TypeScript, but you can feel free to use JavaScript if you're not quite comfortable with TypeScript just yet. All right, now that's done, we can change directory into that newly created folder for us. And I'm going to use Visual Studio Code in this video, but if you're using a different editor, just feel free to use whatever you're comfortable with. Let's have a quick look at what our project is initialized with here. So we have 2 pages within the pages directory. The first one is the _app.tsx or .jsx if you use JavaScript. And as you can see in here, we have the ThirdWeb provider configured with our active chain ID, which is the blockchain or the network that we want to use throughout our application, wrapping our entire application. So this ThirdWeb provider component is now wrapping every page in our application, which the only page we have right now is this index.tsx page, which is the home page of our application. And as you can see here, we have 3 React hooks imported from thirdwebdev/React, and these are enabled since the ThirdWeb provider wraps our application. We can use these hooks anywhere within our application, as long as it's underneath or wrapped within that ThirdWeb provider component. And the 3 hooks we have are all kind of wallet related. And the first one is the user address hook, which gets the currently connected address. And then we have the use MetaMask, which connects the user's MetaMask wallet to our website, and the use disconnect, which obviously disconnects the wallet from our website. And we have some conditional logic just to sort of get started. We have a conditional operator on the address here to say if there is an address, then show that wallet address, as well as the disconnect wallet button. And if there isn't an address, then we'll show the connect wallet button. So you can kind of see how we have a very basic flow here where we have a connect button, connect with MetaMask button. If the user connects, then they'll see their address. And that just gives us a nice boilerplate to start with the chain ID we have configured on line 5 in the _app.tsx here. And we're not going to be using the Ethereum mainnet, as we don't want to use any real funds when we're just sort of testing around. And the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to change this from mainnet to the Goerli Ethereum testnet. The next thing I'm going to do is actually install the Auth SDK from ThirdWeb. So to do that, we can run yarn add, or if you haven't got yarn installed, you could run npm install. But since I'm using yarn, I'm going to run yarn add at thirdweb-dev/auth. And that'll go ahead and install the auth package for us. And you can see that pop up in package.json here. So we now have the at thirdweb-dev/auth React and the TypeScript SDK. The next thing we want to do is at the root of the project, we're going to create a file called auth.config.js. And within this file, the first thing we're going to do is import the ThirdWeb auth from the auth/next package, which is the Next.js part of the authentication SDK. And what we're going to do from this file is we want to export both the ThirdwebAuthHandler and the getUser function from that ThirdWeb auth here. So you can see those are both exported from the object that we imported here. And we're just re-exporting those with the configuration that we're going to use for our website. So the 2 things we need to pass in here is firstly our private key, as well as the domain. And I'll go through and explain these now. So the first thing we want to do is our private key. And the reason we need our private key is to securely generate the messages that users are going to sign when they sign the message to sign in with their Ethereum wallet. So a user will click a button, they'll be prompted to sign a message that we've generated. And basically it ensures that we're generating valid messages that are getting signed when users are trying to sign into our application. And this is not best practice. What I'm doing here is loading from an environment variable, so I wouldn't recommend using the same method that I am in this video. This is just to sort of keep it simple, but we do have a resource in the description of A, how to get your wallet's private key, as well as B, the best practice when it comes to securely storing a private key. And it's not the best way to do it as I am doing in this video. It's just for the sake of keeping it brief in this video. So I definitely suggest reading those two guides in the description if you do want to follow the best practices. And the second item we have here is the domain. And now this comes up in that message that users are prompted to sign when they attempt to sign into our application. So it'll say example.org wants you to sign in with your wallet into the application. Or you could say thirdweb.com here, and it'll say thirdweb.com wants you to sign into the application. And this just needs to be a consistent value. It doesn't have to be any valid domain name or anything like that. It can just be any string, but it does need to be consistent throughout your application as you use it with the Auth package. Notice we're exporting two key things from this Auth config file. And the first thing we're exporting is this ThirdwebAuthHandler function, as well as the getUser function. What we're going to be doing is we're going to be building out a catch-all API route that this ThirdwebAuthHandler function handles. What I mean by that is if we go ahead and create a folder within the pages folder here called API, within that we create an Auth folder. And within that Auth folder, we create a catch-all route, which you can say in Next.js with the open square bracket, the spread operator, which is just three individual dots. And then we call this file thirdweb close bracket .ts. And what this means is all of the API requests that go to /API/auth/anything will get caught by this catch-all. And what we do within this sort of catch-all API route handler is we say, okay, import the ThirdwebAuthHandler with our configuration setup that we defined in this auth config file. So this is the ThirdwebAuthHandler with the private key and with the domain name setup. Let's import that. Let's go ahead and export that now that we've set it up with our config file. And what this does is essentially catches all of the internal API requests to API/auth/anything. So for example, the login function provided by the Auth SDK would call the /API/auth/login, which would get caught by this and say, yo, ThirdwebAuthHandler, you need to handle this. I don't know what to do with it, but I've just told you to go and handle it. And I feel like the best way to kind of explain how this works under the hood is if we actually look at the source code of the ThirdwebAuthHandler itself. So this is the source code of how this works under the hood. If we take a look at line 49 here, in the wrong file, sorry, in line 49 here, we have the ThirdwebAuthHandler, which you can see accepts the next API request and next API response that you might expect to come into a Next.js API route. And what this does is it says, okay, I need you, the other functions in this file to handle what's going on here. So it says, okay, ThirdwebAuthRouter, handle this with the context of this API request coming in. And if we scroll up here, we have the ThirdwebAuthRouter, which also accepts this request, the response, and the context that you find in all of Next.js's API routes. And what this does is it says the catch-all must be called ThirdWeb. So we destructure ThirdWeb from the request query. And now we can see what API route we're on. And it says based on the API route that's being requested. So we have login, the user, and the logout API functions here. And it says, okay, I need you to handle that logic depending on what API route we're on. So basically, when a internal request from the Auth SDK, for example, says hit an API endpoint, which the login function would call the /auth/login API endpoint, then it comes into here, it gets handled in line 30, for example, and it says, okay, login handler, which is imported in this file, handle this request for logging in. And as you can see, here is where the logic is under the hood. So without anything being written in these individual API routes, like we would have to build out login, logout, and get user API routes ourselves, we're just saying Here's catch everything, and the code that's inside the SDK handles those 3 API routes for us. And for example, if we dive into the login handler here, we can see the payload is being generated, which is the signed message. So the user signs a message, that payload gets sent to this API route, and it handles all of the errors, generates a token, validates that auth token, redirects if the token is invalid, and then down here it's finally setting a cookie on the an authentication cookie on the user's browser, and provides some information and some serialization, and then redirects to the redirect URL that we're about to configure in the ThirdWeb provider. So you can see how all of this complex logic gets handled for us under the hood, and all we're kind of doing is saying, let's catch all of these auth requests in the API folder and just let the ThirdwebAuthHandler handle it under the hood without having to write any of this complex logic ourselves. So what I've done off screen is I've just reset our application to an empty state on the home page. So I've just deleted all of the contents that came from the boilerplate on this index.tsx file. And what we're going to do now is walk you through the steps of how we can set up this home page to be only accessible to wallets that have an NFT from a specific NFT collection. And the first part is we're going to import all of the logic that we're going to be using in this homepage. So first we have the React package from React, we have the ThirdWeb TypeScript SDK, we have the use logout function, which is going to allow users to log out or unauthenticate, if that's a word, from the application once they've reached this page. We have the get user function, which is the second thing that we exported from this auth config file here, which gets the connected user if there is one, and we can do that on the server side. We have a utility function that we're going to write in this tutorial to check if the connected wallet address has an NFT or has a balance of the NFTs greater than 0. And we have some styles which you can copy from the full source code available in the description if you want to have the same look and feel as we do in this application that we build out. So once we've got all of our styles sorted out, the first thing we want to do is export that default function home. And beneath the home page, we're going to be using get server-side props, which is a Next.js specific function that says every time a user tries to reach this page, let's run the code within this function before we try and reach or render whatever's on the actual function that we're rendering, which is the home page in our case. So the kind of flow of the logic is this code gets run first, and what we'll do is if they don't have an NFT, we'll send them to the login page. They're not allowed to access this page, but if they do, then we'll let them sort of pass the test, and then they'll reach this home page where they'll show the restricted content. So within this get server-side props, what we're doing first is we're calling that get user function that we imported from the auth config file, and we're passing the context.request. So we're passing the request information into that get user function. And what that does is if there is a connected user and an authenticated user, then we can access their address in this user.address field here. So you can see this either returns null or a ThirdWeb auth user, which we can access the wallet address. And if there is null, that means there isn't currently a connected or authenticated user. They haven't signed in and signed that message that we prompt them on the login page that we're going to build next. And beneath the user, we can say if there is not an authenticated user, so the user hasn't signed in with the sign-in function that we're going to build out next, then we'll redirect them to the login route. So you can see already kind of where this is going and saying, okay, if there's not a user, then we don't know whether or not they have an NFT balance greater than 0. Let's send them to the login page. Beneath that, we have a simple check to see if we have our ThirdWeb Auth private key environment variable. You won't need to do this if you're following the best practice that we have in the guide in the description. Please remember, this is not best practice to store your private key and environment variable, or even worse, store it in plain text. So this is just a simple check to make sure that the next statement that we're about to write, where we use the ThirdWeb SDK.from private key and pass in that private key value, as well as the network we're going to be using. Here it's Mumbai. You can just use whatever network that your NFT collection is deployed to. beneath the SDK instantiation, we have that utility function that we haven't written yet called check balance. And what this does is it passes in the SDK as well as the address that we got from the get user function. And it passes it into this utility function and checks if the user has an NFT balance of the NFT collection that we're checking. And if it does, it returns true. If it doesn't, it returns false. So we have this has NFT variable, which is a true or false value to say if this user has a balance of the NFTs greater than 0. And beneath that, we can again say a simple similar logic as we did above here to say if the NFT balance is not greater than 0, so if not has NFT, then we redirect them to the login state again. So if the user is authenticated but they don't have an NFT or an NFT balance greater than 0, then they'll again be bounced back to the login page before they're allowed to reach the home page here. And finally, if they do pass all of the tests, so they have authenticated and they have an NFT balance greater than 0, then we can just return empty props since we're not required to sort of return any information or any data. You could potentially have a database request here. We've said, okay, now all of the tests have passed. We can fetch some information from a database and serve that to the user in a restricted manner. But just for simplicity, we're just going to return nothing and we'll show some content in the actual homepage in the JSX here. So let's go ahead and do that now. We're just going to return a simple div with some styling imported from the styles. Again, you can copy those from the full project in the description. But we have a simple div that says, this is the restricted access page, and thank you for being a member of our NFT community. So it's just a little thank you message for holding an NFT from the NFT collection. And again, you could potentially make a database request to, I don't know, show some kind of restricted content and serve that on this homepage component here. But just for simplicity's sake, we're just saying a thank you message here. And the final step of this page is we want the logout functionality. So we'll import the logout function from the useLogout hook that we got from the React SDK here. And we'll have a simple button that calls that logout function when it is clicked down here. So we have onClicked, call the logout function. And this is just a simple button that says logout. When they click it, they'll be redirected to the login route, which is the page that we're about to build now. So let's go ahead and create that page now. So let's create a new file within the pages directory called login.tsx or .jsx if you're just using JavaScript. And within this page, we'll again import a ton of logic from the ThirdWeb dev/React package, which is our React SDK. So we have a number of hooks here. We have the use address, use MetaMask, use edition drop, use claim NFT, and use network mismatch, use user, and the use login. So these final two here are the React hooks for Auth. So use user will grab the currently connected or authenticated user if there is one. And the use login hook is the hook that we were kind of describing earlier, where we click a button, the login function is called, and that will internally make that API request to the /auth/login route. And the ThirdwebAuthHandler will handle the logic for us behind the scenes. And again, we have these styles here that you can copy from the source code in the description. So what we're going to do beneath this is, again, we have this functional component. This time it's called login. Within that, we have the usage of these hooks that we've imported. So we have the use MetaMask and the use address here. Again, we have similar ones which are related to the network that the user is connected on. So we're going to detect the chain ID or the network that the user is currently on. And if they're on the wrong chain ID compared to the chain ID that we configured on line 6 in our _app.tsx file here, which is currently go early. So we're going to basically make sure before we attempt to call any logic that the user is on the correct network. And this function here, the use network, has a function called switch network, which allows us to request the user to swap to the network that we want them to be on. And this use network mismatch hook detects if they are on a different network than the one that we configured in the active chain ID here. Beneath that, we have a connection to our edition drop contract. So I've deployed a edition drop, which is an NFT of type ERC1155 NFT collection on the ThirdWeb dashboard. And this is just the contract address. So prior to this, you'll need to have an NFT collection, and you can use either use edition drop or use NFT collection, use NFT drop, or use contract if you're bringing along your own NFT collection that isn't deployed using ThirdWeb's tools. But this is essentially just to say, if you don't have an NFT, we'll have a button for you to claim an NFT on this login page. Maybe you want to include this in your application, but it's not a necessity. And beneath that, we have the logic to claim an NFT using the use claim NFT hook. So again, that's not necessarily required. We're just allowing users to claim NFTs so that they can actually sort of test out the logic and claim the NFT so that they can view the index.tsx page or the home page after they have claimed that NFT. So again, that's not necessarily relevant to you, but if you do want to have that capability of claiming an NFT on the login page, then this is how you can do it using this use claim NFT hook here. Beneath that, we're going to use our Auth SDK hooks. And we first use the use login hook. So this was kind of what we were describing before, where you click this button called login and it calls this login function. And what that does, it'll make an API request to our /API/auth/login. The ThirdwebAuthHandler will handle that logic, run the login handler function in the source code where it manages the generation of that token, the validation of the signature on the backend, and creates the cookie for us and manages that on the client for the user. Beneath this, we have the use user hook, and we're not actually using it in this page. I just thought it would be cool to show off the use user hook as well. And basically what this does is it gets the currently authenticated user, if there is one, and we can access their address. Now onto the UI, we have a conditional logic based on the address, which is the currently connected wallet address, which isn't necessarily authenticated. It's just the connected wallet address from this use MetaMask hook. So if there is an address, we'll show the welcome message and just show their address formatted to be a bit shorter. Beneath that, we have the button to sign in, which calls the login function here. So this is the main important kind of button of the entire application that allows the user to sign in, run that login functionality on the back end. And what we need to do next is we actually configure where the redirect is after that login function is complete. So once we finish with this login page, we'll go back and configure where we want to send those users to after they have successfully logged in. But back on the login page, we'll just say for demo purposes, you can claim an NFT from the collection below. So that's why we have that use edition drop and the use claim NFT up here. And here is just a button that makes sure they're on the right network before they try and claim an NFT from the drop. And as I said, this might not necessarily be relevant for you. You might not want to have this claim button on the login page. You might just want to have that sign in button. But this is an option where you can have the option to claim an NFT from the login page itself. In that case, users can sort of see that they're not allowed to access the content, but have the option to claim an NFT from the drop. They'll then be allowed to see the content on the homepage. And in the case where there is not a connected wallet address, we simply show the connect with MetaMask button again, so the user can connect to the website and then they'll see the sign in button and interact with all of this logic up here. So if we go to our ThirdWeb provider here, there's a few things that we need to configure as I was describing with that. So if we go back to our _app.tsx file, there are a few things we need to configure to make sure our auth config is properly set up. So as I was saying in this login component here, we have the use login. And for example, where do we want to send users after they log in is one of the auth config options that we're going to pass into this ThirdWeb provider. So what we can do is we can add this auth config prop here, and it says a configuration used for ThirdWeb auth usage enables users to log into backends with their wallet. So let's configure this one now. And if we take a look at the options that we can pass into this auth config object here, we can see we have three. We have auth URL, domain, and the login redirect. The first one is the auth URL. So if we take a look at what this suggests for us in the auth URL, it says the backend URL of the authentication endpoints. So for example, if your endpoints are at /API/auth/login, this should be set to /API/auth, which is exactly what we're going to do. And just so that's even more clear, you can see we have within this pages folder, we have /API/auth, and then the sort of catch-all route here of the ThirdwebAuthHandler. So that's what that value means in this auth URL. And the next one is a domain. If we hover over this, this just says the front-end domain used to generate the login payload. This should match the domain used on your auth backend. And that's important because it should match that example.org value that we configured in the auth config.js file. So let's go ahead and match that up. Example.org. And the final one is the URL to redirect to after a successful login. And for us, that's just going to be the homepage. So essentially the flow is the user will log in on the login page. So they'll call this login function, they'll sign the message, which will say the domain wants you to sign into this application. And then once that success or the login is successful on the back end, they'll be redirected to this login redirect route, which is our homepage here. So from a user perspective, they'll sign that message, they'll attempt to pass the tests in our get server-side props function here that we have to make sure that they have a balance greater than 0, which we're about to write up just in a second here. And then if they do, they'll be allowed to access the restricted content on the homepage. But if they don't have an NFT, they'll just be bounced back to the login page. And maybe you could change the logic of this to be kind of more user-friendly, where you send them to a page that says, sorry, you don't have an NFT collection. You can claim one from here, or an NFT from the NFT collection rather. You can claim one here. But for now, just for simplicity, we're just sending them back to the login page until they do pass the check balance check here. And the last thing we need to do is write this check balance function. So let's go to the root of our project and we'll create a new folder called util. And within that util folder, we'll create a function called check balance. You can do JS or .ts. In this case, we'll just do .ts. And essentially what this function does is it connects to the NFT collection of your choice. In our case, I'm going to be using the edition drop contract that I've created by the ThirdWeb dashboard, checks the balance of the connected address that it gets passed in, and returns the true or false value of if that balance value is greater than 0. So essentially it just checks if you have more than 0 NFTs from the NFT collection that we're connecting to. So what we do in this check balance function is accept 2 parameters. The first one is the actual ThirdWeb SDK itself. And the second parameter is the address of the wallet that we're going to be checking if they have a balance greater than 0 of. So the first thing we want to do is to connect to the NFT collection of your choice. So in this case, this is just an edition drop contract that I've deployed via the ThirdWeb dashboard. So you can replace this with your contract address if you have an NFT collection that you've deployed already. If you haven't, go ahead and deploy one via the ThirdWeb dashboard and configure that, and just copy and paste the contract address into this here. And make sure you're using the right function here. So I'm using get edition drop. You might be wanting to use the get NFT collection or get edition or get NFT drop, get signature drop. We have a variety of NFT collections available. And of course, you can bring your own NFT collection that you've deployed using the contracts SDK and the CLI, or even import your own NFT collection that isn't deployed by ThirdWeb. It is a little bit more complex if you want to do that, but that's kind of out of scope for this video. Beneath the connection of our contract, we check the balance of the address that we passed in as a parameter. And in this case, since this is an ERC 1155 NFT collection, we're checking the token ID as well as a second parameter passed into balance of here. So we're checking the addresses balance of token ID 0 from this edition drop NFT collection. Now, if you're using ERC 721, you won't need this second parameter, as you would just be checking to see if they own more than one unique NFT from the collection. And finally, we say return the true or false value of if the balance is greater than 0. So if the user, the address that got passed into this, do they have a balance that is greater than 0, and GT is just shorter for greater than, as I've noted in this comment here. That's just because we're working with big numbers in the world of crypto and Web3. So now that we have the check balance function that is imported in our get server side props here, the check balance, we have the has NFT variable that has the true or false value of that get balance is greater than 0. So if we open up the terminal here and we run the yarn dev command, this will bring up our application at localhost 3000. You can see if we try and access the homepage route here, so I'm trying to access just localhost 3000 / which is the homepage, we get bounced to the login page straight away because that get server-side props code snippet or that code block is running, and it says you're not authenticated. Immediately just redirect to the login page. And you'll see here, we should see the connect with MetaMask button. Initially, I've already gone ahead and connected my wallet with localhost 3000, so that's why I don't see it straight away. But you'll see the connect with MetaMask button. You'll connect your wallet to the localhost 3000 or wherever your website is deployed, connect, and then the address will be detected by that user address hook, and you'll see the state that I'm seeing now. So you can see we have the sign in button here, and we have the claim an NFT for kind of demo purposes of skipping the NFT gated website check to make sure that you can actually access the homepage at all. So let's go ahead and click the sign in button here. And you can see we have the domain name that we configured in the ThirdWeb provider wants you to sign in with your account, and this is your wallet address. Make sure that you're requesting, and this is just a message that gets generated by the Auth SDK. So if we go ahead and sign that message, we should see, since this wallet does have an NFT from the collection, you should see, as we see here, we are successfully redirected to the homepage. We pass the checks in that get server-side props function now, since we are firstly authenticated, and we also have an NFT balance greater than 0 in this collection. And now you can see we can access the homepage, and if I refresh, that is persisted, since behind the scenes that's being stored in cookies for a set amount of time. And all of the restricted content is now accessible now that we've authenticated successfully on the backend and signed that message, proven to the application that we do own this wallet and that we do have an NFT balance greater than 0. From this page, we can log out, which will bounce us back to the login page. We can claim an NFT, even though we already have one. We can sign in again, which should bounce us back to the homepage. You can kind of see how this flow works now. We have this user available with that get user hook anywhere in our application now, so we can access all of that information on the client and the server side, which is an excellent way to make sure that the user trying to access any restricted content is the user that they actually claim to be. But that's it. We've built out the full NFT gated website. I hope you enjoyed that little project that we built out together. If you enjoyed the video, please remember to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. And if you got stuck along the way, remember you can always access the source code in the description of the video, as well as a link to our Discord, where you can join me among many other devs, as well as the rest of the ThirdWeb team, to sort of help you out with any questions that you might have. But with that said, we'll see you in the next one.